So welcome to the Smart QA Musings, which is really a gentle flurry of interesting thoughts. And today's and next week's topic of interest, which I'm going to muse about, is really on people's side, about expectations from modern quality engineers. And I'm sure it's very pertinent to all of us because it's more from what do people expect out of me? Maybe I'm a test practitioner, maybe I'm a senior practitioner, whatever level, etc. What do people really expect from me? And probably it's an interesting time of the year as we kind of wind down, reminisce about what we did, and look forward to something more interesting as we step into the new year. I've kind of broken this into two parts, and the part one that's today is kind of talking about the expectations as far as mindsets and capabilities, and next week is slightly different. Okay, we'll talk about that. So question is, what is expected of a modern QA? And I'm sure all of you will have brilliant answers. And I'm sure it's a the list of answers is probably going to be unending. What I've tried to do as part of my musings is to kind of give it a little interesting structure and maybe use that as, hopefully see that as interesting way to think about it. The more often today, I think when we see about, when we talk about modern testing, it's seemingly more technology familiarity, reasonably and very adept with tools, and somehow we think it's probably a tech savvy. Is the answer correct? Yeah, it is. But is that the only answer? Maybe not. Because today we look at the larger picture, and when you see the larger picture, tech plays a significant role because I think tech is central to everything that we do today. But really, the expectations are not just limited to the notion of tech and technology and tools. It is reasonably multidimensional, which spans across a variety of different aspects, like maybe the mindset, the way I think, my attitude, and so on and so forth. Skills that is related to one part testing, second part technology, third part the domain, depending on what domain you work with. Some domains are important to know. If it's a hardcore product, maybe technology takes a little front seat, right? And there are aspects of human aspects. Am I really able to understand the users within the organization, outside the organizations? How does that matter in what I do? And finally, the way I do my work, the practice. I'm not talking about the organizational process. I'm talking about the one's individual practice. And that is really the bunch of activities that I do. But are activities enough? Probably not. That's where the outcomes come. What am I really delivering at the end of the day? So given that it's multidimensional, what I'm probably going to do for the next maybe 15, 20 minutes is to kind of lay this out and hopefully give you an interesting way to look at what people may be expecting. Therefore, this is not I'm not going to put on all the technologies and all this stuff, which I'm quite sure you are more adept at. Right? The idea is to give you an interesting way to think about it. So in this webcast, we will probably look at the mindset aspects, the capabilities aspects in terms of test and tech and domain and human aspects at a meaningfully interesting level. So let's talk about what do they mean and why have I broken it down into 4 parts? Why can't I just have set expectations and then put a nice mishmash? I've kind of looked at the entire notion of expectations as attitudes and belief, which could be an aspect called mindset. It could be about expectations on the skills and the knowledge being what I know, skills being how I translate the knowledge into work. That is capabilities. And okay, I have got a great mindset, I have got good knowledge, I have delivered the skills. Now I do some actions which I do in the daily work, and that's the work part of it. And is there expectations out of the work that is being done? Okay, I do great work, but then is that good enough? It's really about expectations and the results. Am I really contributing to the larger context? Right? And how does that relate to outcomes? And keeping these 4 fairly important to understand that we can delineate the notion of expectations probably in these 4. And I'm not saying this is the only 4. This is what I could logically come up with. So if you look at each of these and ask, what's the focus? Mindset is it governs how you think. Capabilities governs in a way, gives you the focus as to what you can do, what you're capable of doing. Whereas when we talk about the work is, okay, you can do this, and what do you actually do? How do you actually end up doing it? And ultimately, what do you really accomplish? What do you achieve, right? And that's really the focus of each of these various facets. And are they connected? You bet. They are not independent of each other because the mindset drives the approach to tasks. And the capabilities, in a way, determine the potential to do good work or perform. And the work is a reflection of the amount of diligence and effort that you put in. It's not just mere potential, it's reality. And finally, the outcomes are really the actual value and the effect that we have on the larger context. The team that we work with, the organization that we work with, the customers that we work with, and so on, and the business as a whole, and as an individual, the community at large. And that's just to give you some example how people look at some of these terms, right? Growth mindset, proactive, capabilities related to testing and coding. Outcomes could be high quality, maybe trust, and so on. So just to give you some ideas of the example. So to put it in this context and put that connection here, this is how it looks like. Mindset influences how you use your capabilities. And mindset is fairly deep because we really have to figure out what are those elements that in a way govern mindset. And that's very subtle, right? And you can't just learn a mindset. It doesn't happen. You can probably learn knowledge because that's what you do. And then you apply it to make it into skills. And that's how capabilities happen. But subtly, the notion of how I think, my attitude, the mindset that I have influences how. And that's the connection. Now, capabilities, obviously, I think you understand this connection because capabilities really enable you to do or perform a work effectively. So if I have great capabilities, then my chances of me being able to do good work is pretty high. And finally, you can do great amount of work, you can do diligent amount of work, you can do a lot of work, but then the real question is there an outcome? And that's where this connects onto the outcomes, right? So it's a very interesting, well-formed connection that we end up having between mindset, capabilities, work, and outcomes. And in today's musings, the focus is to kind of give a certain amount of time to think about what are elements that relate to the first part, the first two, mindset and the capabilities, and probably kind of move over and talk about work and outcomes the next week. Now, before we jump along, question to you. I'm sure you know what I'm asking. What do you see? If you want, you can just type up in the chat window. It's not a very complicated question. What do you see? It's a blurred image of what? I guess it's a can of Coca-Cola, right? That's what you see. That's what certainly I see. I'm quite sure all of us see the same thing. Now, obviously, what are the colors that we see? We see some black, we see some light blues, we see some reds, we see some whites. Yeah, it's just that it's a very interesting pixelated picture. Now, the funny thing is, this picture does not have red. It has only blue, black, and white. I'm sure some of you may have seen this picture because it's probably circulating on the internet or WhatsApp or whatever. I saw it on Facebook. Then I traced it back to a Reddit. I don't know which came first, but then I saw it in Reddit. Funny thing is, there is no red. And I'm like scratching my head and say, look, I can see red. And I'm quite sure all of us can read red, right? You can see Coca and then you automatically see red. But the guy says, there is no red. There is only blue, black, and white. And it's like, wow. I know what the guy said. Why don't you zoom in and see? So I did the zoom in. Now I zoomed it and I'm sure it's more pixelated, quite obviously. But now I look at it, actually there is no red. It's just black. And maybe blues and whites, as he mentioned, the guy mentioned. It's kind of funny. What does this seemingly tell you? It just tells you the mind is such a wonderful device, it fills in what's not there. It is so conditioned of having seen Coke with red, that when you see a Coke in this pixelated picture, which is actually not red, the mind automatically fills in. So it's important to understand that the power of the mindset. And that's why I think it's interesting to understand what do you mean the expectations of the mindset, right? It's harder. It's a very, very soft, subtle piece, right? But the easier ones are like knowledge and skills to some degree because it's, habits and practice. But this is hard. And that's why it's troublesome. And especially in our discipline of finding issues, it's harder because this plays a much more interesting, significant role, at least certainly in our discipline. I'm not saying other disciplines any less. I'm just focusing on the aspect of quality engineering. And therefore, appreciate the fact that our attitude, the way we think, the way we are conditioned is terribly significant. And maybe we spend a few minutes trying to see what that may be and how to kind of put that in context, because it's very wishy-washy. It's not very clear. You don't have a course which says, testing mindset course or something of that sort, and you can just attend a class and lo and behold, your mindset is changed. It doesn't work that way. I think you know that. So let me try to, the way I'm used about it is, this is how I looked at the notion of categories and aspects. And I'm sure there is many, many ways that each one of you can probably look at this and maybe add something, delete something, put them together and so on. But this is one simple way to look at it. So I'm looking at the mindset as in terms of, let me look at the mindset as an individual with oneself. Forget about anything else. Forget about my mindset as in relationship to the team or organization or product or technology or anything for that matter. Just look at it from oneself. That's one way to look at it. That's the topmost. Let me look at the mindset in the context of the job that I do with this, maybe, is there a testing mindset? Is there some testing attitude? Or look at it from test is part of a larger engineering piece because we are constructing something, maybe a brand new one, maybe we are extending one, maybe we are fixing one, whatever, but engineering at large. This is in some sense the activity of test and the larger activity of engineering, so to speak. And now let's shift over to the people side and then say, okay, let me see what's the mindset that I need to have in relationship to the people, as in terms of internal folks, which might be my engineering team. You can extend it to an internal team as in terms of engineering plus product owners and managers and so on. You could take it further. I just put the whole thing as engineering team. Or it could be externals. The people who are going to consume the application, consume the product, and therefore it's end users. And then finally, of course, what is it in the context of my organization, the company, the business of the company, the external market and business, so to speak. And then I'm asking myself, so what do people expect out of me in these various various aspects? And that's what I'm going to probably list down one by one. And to understand that this is not the complete list, or I cannot prove that this is all that is. I'm just trying to give you a good probably a way of breaking it down and giving you certain ideas, and I'm sure you can extend it much better. But when it comes to oneself, when I ask what do people expect of me as an individual, they expect me, for example, to think as a critical thinker, a guy who will not just accept anything, the guy who will really go and experiment, find out, ask why, know why it is working that way, certainly have a little more systems approach so that I am more suited for the job that I am in. So systems thinking, critical thinking is probably a very underrated but terribly fundamental to what we do. These, I'm quite sure you appreciate the notion of being curious, the notion to ask questions without worrying about if it's interesting or stupid, but hopefully ask questions that matter to the context rather than just asking random questions, quite obviously. The ability to fool around, experiment, try out without fear. And of course, the ability to extend yourself in terms of learning, which is also the other piece is also the unlearning, which means I use both in the same context. And finally, of course, not just about doing, but it's also about the art of listening, right? So you are kind of seeing, listening, observing. And those are all very, very individual kind of pieces which are driven by mindset, which translates itself into traits. And that's one part of the mindset. That could be, I've just condensed into these. This I'm sure you and I understand far more better. There can be a long list. But if I were to put out a few key ones, I would think of it as, look, what you really need is a very probing mentality, not a doing mentality. It is a seeking mentality of issues, right? So that I don't see the red. If it is not there, I have to kind of deliberately not see the red in the Coke can because I know it's not there. But then the mind tells you it's there. And that I'm quite sure if you watch Matrix 1, you would relate that to that one clip in that movie, the one scene in the movie, where the guy says, I know this is not chicken, but the mind tells me it's chicken because that is basically artificially created by the machine in the Matrix. And he says, I know it is not chicken, but the mind thinks it's chicken. When I eat it, the mind responds it's a chicken, so I'm happy. So what do I care if it's not a chicken, right? And that's brilliant, right? So the idea of probing, issue seeking becomes important. And that naturally lends itself to saying, are you a detailed person? Are you a superficial person? Are you organized in how you arrange things and what you do? Mental organization. Have you have a good set of models to think about and therefore do? At the same time, can you be random? Can you be ad hoc? Can you be creative and make around? And do you understand the fact that, it is highly iterative, so it's not like one shot. So like this, there are a few of these, right? But I just thought some of the key ones could be of interest, which is this. And all of us have, it's not that this is not there or there. It is just that it's, how much is what I am. I may be a very detailed person and not able to see the bigger picture. I may be I may be a very intent listening person, but I'm not a very critical thinker. So, it's not, but, partial, right? So when you talk about engineering at large, moving away from here, testing is a part of validation, and validation is part of the larger notion of construction and development. So what do I really mean when you say engineer? What do you mean? When the word called engineer connotes the notion of logical, right? I'm able to use logic. I'm driven by time and pragmatics. I'm not just a scientist who's thinking in the air. I am pragmatic. And being an engineer, I wanted to ensure that it's repeatable. I'm focused on time, so I know that things have to be done in a particular time and delivered. And as an engineer, I'm always worried about the outcome. It is not I'm doing it because it's great fun. The fun is important, but then I think the outcomes to the consumer is terribly important, and that's very engineering thinking. And engineering is always associated with optimality because we know something is less, something is more, something is hard, something takes too much money. But then always, as a good engineer, we're always searching for optimizing constantly. As an engineer, we have to make constant decisions because things don't go the way you want because you are in the process of creative construction. And therefore, the idea of constantly adjusting from a notion of agility, planning and, of course, adjusting to the plans and making decisions on the adjustments, hopefully based on data, not on hunches. And those are all engineering characteristics. And that's what I think when, irrespective of what discipline of engineering we have studied and we come into possibly software, these are some certain mindsets hopefully have been inculcated and translated into habits, which adds value to our job. And that's what we call as an engineering mindset, right? And then, so if you consider the first one to be a little more like a personal mindset and a testing mindset and engineering mindset, just to give it names if you like, this is more from a team perspective, right? I'm working with folks internally, folks externally. So what governs the way I work? The ability to communicate clearly, the mindset of clarity in terms of whatever I express in whatever form, the intent to assist and collaborate and solve problems rather than seeing somebody as a competitor. Understanding the critical notions, focusing on the critical pieces, and working to manage these things that are fundamentally critical within the team. And when it comes to end users, I think the whole idea is, okay, I can be testing a product or an application, but is that what it is? No, we're actually trying to solve somebody else's problem, and therefore empathy becomes a more fundamental. How do I get into the skin of you, the end user, and therefore feel? And that's why I think we try to put ourselves in terms of what are their journeys. And of course, that context, when it comes to UX, because You can't do meaningful UX without appreciating customer journeys and having empathy. And what does that mean? I must know as to what are the situations that is being used, environments that is being used, and customers and end users themselves have, all kinds of expectations, some which are interesting, some which are not possible. And therefore, the management, the ability to negotiate, manage with end users, especially when you get into the senior rungs of leading, become critical and become therefore meaningful expectations. And finally, when it comes to organizations and business, the mindset of orientation towards value, because we're not just doing work, we're really asking, hey, how am I doing? What am I doing? How is it adding value to my business? Is it helping the organization sell more? Does it improve the market share? Does it help me kind of improve the profits? Does it reduce the cost of fixes? And therefore what it means is you are not just seeing yourself as a person who is like, okay, I'm a guy in test. I really are seeking a larger notion of ownership. And because I own, there will be work that I do which are interesting, work that I do which are staid and boring, and therefore I constantly adapt to meet the larger context of needs, and that is a mental trait. And that's the last notion of the mindset where we talked about the organization and business. And this is one way of looking at it. So I guess the latter three are more people and business centric, whereas the other one is individual and certain traits that are required for the job. And that's how I've tried to arrange, in some sense, the notion of mindset. I hope it was, an interesting way to look at it. So let me kind of jump along and say, okay, there is a mindset that's very subtle, something very personal, and it takes time to get there. It's conditioned in very many ways that you and I don't know, right? And now that translates into capabilities and skills. Certain things I can learn. Somebody teaches me, I listen, and so on and so forth. And what are those? And they become capabilities. So there can be very many capabilities. Obviously, that's an extraordinarily large laundry list, which I'm quite sure all of us are very well aware. But think about it this way, right? And that's what this is. And we can look at it from capabilities related to the job at hand that we do, the role that we do, which is testing. It can be from the larger role of testing, which is software engineering. And it can be from a larger role of testing, which is quality at large. And then you can go down and look at it from technology, business domain, people. And of course, the technology also means tooling that comes into picture. So I'm not going to belabor these points too much. I was just more interested in kind of giving the structure and then kind of highlighting certain stuff. The idea here is, when it comes to testing, there is probably a million things that's up there. We can go down to all the fine grains, but basically the key things that strike me when it comes to expectation is, do you have a good approach? This is the guy having a good approach and strategy in terms of how he or she is able to decompose how the act needs to be done. And then therefore look at, do they have skills and capabilities as into the various types of tests, various levels of test, various techniques of test? Are they focused from a risk perspective? Are they focused on coverage and adequacy and completeness? Are they focused on clarity of issues and reporting and managing and stuff and associated skills, right? But largely, I'm trying to look at it in terms of saying, okay, I am a guy who is in that particular discipline, and I'm really asking do I have a good approach? Can I translate that good approach? Do I able to constantly steer by looking at it from risk and coverage? And am I able to communicate well in whatever form and therefore assist and so on? When it comes to software engineering, we're looking at it from a life cycle. Do I really understand the larger life cycle of the product and the project and how it means, what it means? Estimation, not just of effort, it's money, it's impact, it's anything that you want to. And then, of course, the larger context is, okay, I understand the life cycle, so am I looking at it from the larger context of build, release, deploy? So when you look at this, obviously there is technology associated with it, there is tools associated with it, there is specific knowledge and skills associated with some of these kinds of stuff, right? So when you take testing and say, okay, testing is a means, but quality at large is larger. So then the things become, do I understand the larger principles of quality, the philosophy of quality philosophy, principles, models, quality is not just some abstract word. There are translations, there are numbers, there are statistics. So my appreciation of good statistical principles to judge a few things is very useful. So it's not limited to just producing numbers or drawing some charts, something more deeper, right? And today, with the realm of LLMs, I guess you understand that it's far more powerful, right? We can do more interesting stuff. And the way you communicate in terms of documentation, templates, processes, standards, analytics itself, how do I judge, make sense of analytics I put in a larger context, right? And then, of course, things like cost of quality, quality control tools. So one of the examples of quality control tools is your RCA or fishbone diagram and stuff, right? So there are many, many quality tools which are not directly testing. FMEA for one, fault tree analysis another. All these are interesting techniques at the larger context of quality. And maybe, as we all grow up, it's important to probably appreciate the larger context of quality itself. Technology, there is a whole bunch. This is a extraordinarily big discipline. I'm sure the laundry list can be many, many pages. But what I think I want to kind of appreciate when we say technology is not just about a language, or it's not just about a framework or a tool or something. It's really about the larger context of application of aspects like computing, algorithms, the way things are architected, the way things are put together and bolted. So certain fundamental aspects of computing, architecture, deployment, internal structures, some bit of algorithm, some bit of pattern, and of course, a million different specific technologies that are current and that are upcoming, right? And that is where I think a lot of these standard JDs would obviously fit in. But what is important to understand is when we say technology, we are really looking at this. Can I be able to understand the larger context of the system I'm building in terms of how it is constructed? Do I understand how it is bolted together, how it is integrated together, how it is deployed, what kind of patterns and models that are in use? And those are the ones which really is technology, right? When it comes to domain is more often the application domain. If in some cases, if I'm building an application for a banking or a supply chain management, knowing the domain is necessarily important. These, I'm sure you appreciated a whole lot. The aspects related to skills related to people in terms of resolution of conflicts, communication, certainly negotiation, because testing is not about just doing a work. Somebody doesn't agree with you, you negotiate. So customer asks you something stupid, you negotiate. Developer doesn't agree with you, you negotiate. And it's not just about doing work, it's also about the ability to be proactive, pulling forward and so on. And now, because you're working in global teams, we're working on distant teams, the notion of diversity, cultural diversity becomes important. And finally, the notion of ownership, which we also talked about as a mindset, translates into certain specific capabilities of what I mean by ownership. And lastly, this is something that we are reasonably adept. There are tons of tools today in the area of test and technology and management and domains and frameworks. So what is it that is useful for me? Depends on what I'm working on, what I wish to work with, and that's where the skills come in. So this to me is approximately the 7 aspects that how I've kind of broken it up. I'll probably take about a couple of minutes before we stop. So I know we are at 12:30. Now let's look at it slightly differently. We looked at it from the viewpoint of mindset. We looked at it from the aspect of capability. Let's take a systemic view. And when you say a systemic view, what does one expect of any system? Maybe it's a software system, maybe it's a process system, system at large. Generally, when you talk about systems and you say, here is a system to do something, this is what you normally expect. You expect the system to be consistent. You expect the system to be effective. You expect the system to be efficient. You expect the system to be responsive. You expect the system to give you good internal measures of what's happening. And finally, of course, you expect system to be scalable. So now I'm saying, hey, if I want to look at the notion of expectations as a systemic view in these contexts, what would it mean? So I'm just shifting gears and looking at it slightly differently. And hopefully you can see the correlation between what we talked about and to some of these, what we are going to put in, just to help you understand. So when I say systemic, from a consistency, people are expectation is, am I reliable? Am I trustworthy? If I ask you to do some job, will you do? If I trust that you will do a great quality job, should I? And that's the notion of reliability that comes in. Consistency in a large way is reliability. So when people have expectation that, hey, this guy is effective, what it simply means is his outcomes are always good. He doesn't produce, he produces or she produces meaningfully good outcomes. It's not just he or she is just working hard, but they also produce meaningful, decent outcomes that add value to what we do. Agility, yes. The guy is responsive. He changes or she changes. She takes ownership, and therefore I can build the trust, and therefore the outcomes can happen. So that's the notion of agility. It's not he or she is dogmatic. He or she is not stuck with a particular thought process. Efficient, I think you understand. I like to view that, hey, there's a high performance person. He's speedy, he's great in what he does, he adjusts very rapidly, and there's this notion of a high performance person, and that's we also judge by, right, when we do appraisals. When you say scalability, what does it mean? Yeah, he or she is not just about himself. He also or she also takes extra effort to assist somebody, to lead certain take some ownership, lead something else, and that's the notion of scalability. What is visibility? Visibility, to a larger degree, expectation that is about how he or she is able to make decisions driven by data. So I'm just trying to correlate that any system is always measured and judged and improved upon by looking at this from the six attributes. And all I'm trying to correlate with treating myself as a system, and then asking myself, hey, how would it look if I were a system, and how would it correlate to elements that we talked about? So as you see, there is a fairly strong correlation that we can see, and that's how we may want to keep in mind that, and therefore, why are we doing this? We are simply doing all this stuff because we are trying to see if I can raise my bar, my personal bar, so that other people see the value in me, and therefore I can grow and I can have a great career, right? That's really what it is. So with this, I have come to a halt. I know I'm 4 minutes off the time. And this week we talked about only the mindset and stuff. Next week I thought I'll dwell upon how important, what do people expect of, also something very unseen, the notion of practice. Practice is my techniques, the way I do things. And finally, what do people see as outcomes? What do people expect of me as outcomes, which is the topic for next webcast, which is next Friday, same time. Thank you so much